Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtadar Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about the G2 summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping and look at what has really evolved. Not much has substantively really changed from this meeting. If there has been a significant progress, then that's not really visible. But certain things have changed, and that is important to note. What has really changed and what has evolved? I think that what has happened is that through this meeting, China has brought the US down to its level, and the US has brought China up to its level via this meeting. So this is a second G2 summit that Donald Trump is having with Xi Jinping. He had one just a few months ago in South Korea in the Busan meeting, so this is a follow-up to that. I have not seen any tweet from Donald Trump using the phrase G2 at the moment, but it is very clear that Donald Trump is now focused on improving relations and stabilizing relations with China, glossing over the disagreements and differences between the two countries and trying to develop some kind of cooperation over issues which are of common interest, and especially for those which are of key interest to the United States. So let me share these developments, but before that, let me just share this video with you, which shows as to how China has catered to Donald Trump's massive ego. This is the famous team announcement. So this is the video that the White House is sharing, so I thought I will share this with you. So this is very clear that this is a major development, and China has given Donald Trump the due respect that he deserves as president of the most powerful country and the biggest economy in the world. Having said that, there are lots of interesting developments. They also visited here. This is a very important location, quite impressive, and Donald Trump was clearly very impressed with this. I too have visited this place. It's called the Temple of Heaven. It's absolutely stunning and beautiful and worth watching. This is the closest that you can see. I'm actually standing very close to the point where Trump and Xi Jinping are standing, but there are thousands and thousands of tourists when I was there. But anyway, so let me say that's very clear that Donald Trump came out as a person seeking to please Xi Jinping, seeking to get some approval from China, whereas Xi Jinping came across as someone who knows his mind and is not afraid to speak his mind and make it very clear. So it was very clear that during the meeting, while Trump was mostly quiet and un-Trump-like, especially when the reporters were screaming questions to him about Tiananmen Square, about Taiwan, he did not go there and speak to reporters freely as he normally does in the United States. So he was also trying to project a very, shall we say, a sober image, Donald Trump. And that is a good thing because we don't want him committing gaffes there which can have policy implications for both these countries and going forward. So what I'm going to do is I mean, there's a lot happening there, a lot being discussed. Donald Trump took some of the richest people in the world, biggest billionaires, the CEO of NVIDIA, the biggest company, which is about to become a $6 trillion company, bigger than most economies except China and the US. There is no, it's bigger than Germany in terms of, well, its net worth is $6 trillion. Germany's annual income is about $5.5 trillion. But yes, he took Apple CEO, he also took Elon Musk, etc. So some of the biggest CEOs of American companies went there. So it was a very powerful entourage. And then, of course, Marco Rubio was with him, and so was Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury. Who was missing was, of course, J.D. Vance was absent. That was very interesting. But anyway, so there were some agreements, and there were a lot of issues that were discussed, and there was no progress made on the issues. And then, of course, there are some profound sources of friction and disagreements. So I have made this very useful. I'm enjoying using AI and creating infographics and learning how to use AI. So I did make some infographics that I'm going to share with you. So please bear with me, this old man's indulgences with new technology. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is what they have agreed upon. So this is the agreements that China and the United States have had. And the agreements is that they will bring about stability in the Strait of Hormuz. So both US and China want the Strait of Hormuz to be opened up immediately, and it is very clear that the United States is hoping that China will put pressure on Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. For the United States, it's absolutely critical. This is destroying US allies. It's hurting the Iranian economy. It's also hurting the Chinese economy. The Chinese want it also because it's costing them. And the Americans want it because it's about America's prestige, and the fact that there is a stalemate clearly looks as if America has lost this war. So they both agree that the Strait of Hormuz should be open. Pakistani should be a little worried from this meeting and the discussions that Trump and Xi Jinping are happening. It is quite possible that the center for negotiations may shift from Islamabad to Beijing. If Xi Jinping decides to take a serious role in negotiations. A word of caution here. I think that Iranians see this war as a war, it's an existential war for them. This is a matter of survival for them, especially for the Islamic Republic. So I don't think Xi Jinping would like to throw his hat in there and be in the forefront of the negotiations, because there isn't much that they can pressure Iran and say, look, you need to give this up and give that up. And the Iranians will say, well, we will not. They're saying no to the US and willing to suffer further military attacks by the US. What can China do to them? And as long as the Strait of Hormuz is blocked by the US, the Chinese are also suffering. So I'm not very sure that Xi Jinping might take a forefront role in this negotiation, but you cannot tell. They are expecting some behind the scenes. Marco Rubio expects some behind the scenes action from the Chinese to put pressure on Iran. They also agreed that restraining Iran's ambitions, especially nuclear and ballistic missiles, but primarily both agree that Iran should not have nuclear weapons, and probably Iran also agrees that it doesn't want nuclear weapons. This is something that it made very clear a long time ago, even at the time of the JCPOA. So on these issues, they seem to be completely agreed. On commercial issues, as far as tariffs are concerned, Donald Trump had frozen certain tariffs. He had rewarded Iran for dealing with the fentanyl issue. So the amount of fentanyl that goes into making a particular kind of drug which is used here in the US, just killing a lot of Americans, has gone down because of the Chinese efforts to curtail the exports of fentanyl. So the US was very happy and reduced tariffs by 10% on China just for that. So whatever agreements were made in Busan, they will continue to the end of 2026 and much into 2027. So basically, they have kicked the can down the road on the issue of tariffs, which means that the issues remain. They are not resolved, and they are at the moment in abeyance, essentially. And so on the agricultural issue, there seems to be some kind of an agreement that China may possibly buy more soybeans and other things that the United States is trying to export. They also want China to buy more Boeing jets. We will see what happens with that. And but they both agree that they need to have stability. So these are the points of agreement. And so if you notice, there's really not much that the needle has not moved much forward than the agreements in Busan in South Korea. So the key issues which are problematic still remain, and I will point them out to you shortly. So this is what they have all agreed upon. And so the sources of frictions that they remain are these. Number one is Taiwan's issue of sovereignty. On the subject of Taiwan, Xi Jinping was very, very tough, and he drew a red line and he said that, look, we want you to handle the Taiwan issue very carefully. If you do any mistakes there will be a destabilization. It is a matter of very serious thing. He said that independence and peace across the strait do not go hand in hand. So it made it very clear that if Taiwan were to declare independence, there will be war. And of course, the big issue is the U.S. promise to sell Taiwan $11 billion of weapons. Trump wants to do that. He wants to make the money. He's a businessman. But it was very interesting that the U.S. readout on this meeting does not mention anything. The White House does not mention anything on the Taiwan issue. Whereas the Chinese have made it very clear that they send the message to the U.S. very clearly, Taiwan is a red line. Marco Rubio did, however, say that, yes, the U.S. policy on China has not changed, which means the strategic ambiguity remains. And they also said a slight warning from Marco Rubio that use of force will not be a good idea on behalf of China. But the Americans didn't come out like Joe Biden would come out and say, yes, if China attacks Taiwan, we will protect Taiwan. No such comments were made by Trump at all. He didn't say anything on Taiwan. The only comment that was made was by Marco Rubio. He's both the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor. So on the subject of advanced technology and tech transfer, there isn't full resolution. Donald Trump still maintains that the most advanced NVIDIA chips, the H100, I think it's called, remains a national security issue, and they will not sell that to China. The U.S. is also trying to ensure that while they're willing to sell certain chips like H1200 or something like that, but they don't want to send the latest and the most advanced to China. The Chinese are also more focused on investment and development of indigenous technology on AI, and they have also tried to buy indirectly through third parties from NVIDIA some of the chips for which they are working on. So there is a tech. The Chinese don't like this prevention of transfer of technology, and the U.S. sees it as a national security issue. That has not resolved. The Americans are still unhappy with the aggressiveness with which China is dealing in the South China Sea with Philippines and others, and no progress was made on that, no agreement. And then, of course, there are some economic issues that Scott Bessent went there to raise. I will actually unpack them shortly for you, and that also remains a source. The way China is conducting its macroeconomic policies are something that the West doesn't like. The Europeans don't like it. The Americans don't like it. But the Chinese are sticking to their guns. There were no discussion of human rights. That must have come as a relief to the Chinese. Americans under Republican control do not really respect and care for human rights as much as the Democrats tend to do. Well, Democrats too, it depends on who is violating human rights really. So in some cases, if it is Iran, if it's China, they will put a lot of pressure on these countries. But then there are other countries which violate human rights, abuse their minorities, kill, torture, do all kinds of things, including rape, and it doesn't bother the Democrats at all. At least all Democrats are not as concerned about that. And finally, this is something that I want to talk about. This is China's industrial policy, and this is the reason why Scott Bessent was part of the delegation. So China's economy is going through very different scenarios, and I will shortly talk about it for those who are watching from India. At midnight or 9:30 in the morning, I will talk about some of the weaknesses in the Chinese economy. So China is going through several challenges. One of the challenges is that it's experiencing deflation rather than inflation. Everybody is suffering from inflation. China is suffering from deflation. Deflation has a terrible impact on various things. It reduces domestic demand, among other things. And it also reduces, because the prices of things are falling, it also reduces the size of the GDP. So, for example, if you sold 10 cars in your entire year for $10 each, then your GDP is $100. But if you sell 10 cars again the next year, but now the price of the car has gone down to 9, then even though you sold the same amount of cars, your GDP is now 90. So there's a shrinkage in GDP as a result of deflation. So deflation has bad impact on the macro numbers. So the Chinese are suffering from that. There's no domestic demand. Part of it is because of the crisis in the real estate market. So what's happening now is that the Chinese are trying to push and grow their economy not by domestic consumption like India is, but by exports. And so they have become an export-driven manufacturing behemoth. And that is hurting manufacturing in Europe, hurting America. Donald Trump has talked a lot about bringing manufacturing back to the US. Not much has really happened because China is basically 50% of the global manufacturing capacity is now in China. So that is something that the Americans want China to change. And China is obviously refusing that. They want China to incentivize domestic consumption. They want Chinese people to buy more. So two things will happen if the Chinese people buy more. Then A, the Chinese will not be under pressure to export, number one. And number two, if they are buying more, then there will be hope that they will also buy some American products. So in the past 1 year, there has been huge decline in American exports to China from $146 billion of exports in 2024 to about 100 something in 2025. So there is a steady decline in American exports to China as there is a decline in Chinese exports to the US. The trade has been declining. So Scott Bessent wants China to change its policies, okay? They don't like the state-driven model. They don't like the subsidies that the governments are doing. They also don't like the trade barriers. Now, this is a very interesting thing. The Chinese came up with something called blocking statute. All right. So whenever the US imposes sanctions on American companies and says that if you buy oil from Iran, we will impose sanctions. And then those American companies which actually act upon the US sanctions. So for example, the US will say, nobody should deal with X company of China because it is trading with Iran. So if Google stops doing business with X, then the Chinese will investigate and harass Google. This is called a blocking statute. So that is creating a problem for American companies. They're very unhappy. So America wants to have the freedom to basically screw anybody using secondary sanctions. They don't want the Chinese to replicate that or to create barriers to that. And so they're pushing against it. So these are the two big things that Scott Bessent wanted to go there and push. One is try to reshape China's manufacturing overcapacity and then try to block the Chinese blocking statute. So that is the two issues. And one idea, interestingly, has been floated called the Board of Trade and Board of Investment, where the Chinese will, it'll be just a caucus, I guess, a group of Chinese appointed negotiators. And so it's like an ongoing dialogue where they will deal with strategic economic issues and resolve. So they don't have to have disagreements which are not immediately resolved because there will be now a standing board where these issues can be immediately discussed and negotiated. So these are some of the developments. So I think the two biggest things that have really happened is this China's warning to the United States very clearly saying we are drawing a red line on Taiwan. And the other issue is that the US is proposing a board of trade and investments. And I think that's a very good idea if it really works. It could improve the trade situation between the US and China. It also sends a message that there is no delinking or decoupling happening. between the two countries. So that's also an interesting development. But one thing that has happened from a geopolitical perspective is this recognition of the rising influence of China and rising importance of China. I do plan to come back after 30-40 minutes here and do a show in Hindi about the chinks in the Chinese armor, or so to speak, in its economy, the weaknesses that I found. And even though there's so much talk about China rising, China also has its economic challenges, which are constraining the speed with which it is reducing the gap between the US and China. So anyway, thank you for watching Conversations. I think the Beijing summit was very critical. It is definitely a G2 summit, two of the world's, the two most powerful economies and two most powerful countries, talking about stability, trying to resolve, even though nothing has been resolved. Let us see what happens after this when Donald Trump comes back, and the first test will be obviously what will happen is the Strait of Hormuz. Will there be a change in Iranian policy under pressure from from China, or the US will have to deal with it directly? So I think that is the first test of what happens as a result of this G2 summit. So anyway, thank you for watching Conversations. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this with your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host Muqtada Khan. Take care. Bye.